Here we are, folks. We are in Easter again in this pandemic season. We did gather last year, and I did say, be outside if you could. And I heard Polly remembering that she went outside, and it was indeed cold. But blessed Easter to each of you. So here's the thing, somebody told something to someone. Somebody told something to someone. That's how we are all here, why we are all here. Now, Mark tells the story of Easter like this. His very ending is, so they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But somebody told something to someone, which is why we are here. Somebody told something to someone, which is why we are here, Easter 2021. Let's hear how Mark tells the whole scene that we mark as Easter. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And they entered the tomb. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. God bless the hearing of these words to some kind of Easter understanding in us. Somebody told something to someone. Maybe when their fear had subsided, maybe when the presence of Jesus's absence couldn't but be told, whether in words or in the way they moved differently. Maybe in the emerging sense of hope that those women carried with them and that could be felt by those who encountered them. Maybe they hinted at it, this presence in the absence. They said something to someone. And so we are here. I got to spend time yesterday with my family, and my nephew is 3.5 years old, and he has a practice with my folks of playing that game when they go for a walk, I Spy with My Little Eye. Do you know that game where you point something, I spy with my little eye something that's blue, right? And then the people you're walking with have to figure out what you're thinking about, right? I spy with my little eye something that's green, and we're looking at the tree leaves, right? So my nephew and my parents have this, they play that game a lot. And Henry was walking, and he said, this is being relayed to me, I wasn't there for it, but we were walking, me and my mom and dad, and we get to this pond in somebody's front yard, right? They've made a little pond, and there's some handmade sculpture items on it. And they say, Henry said the other day, I spy with my little eye something that isn't there. He said, I spy with my little eye something that isn't there. And wouldn't you know it, what he was observing was the absence of something that had been there. There had been a bridge that went over this little pond, just a little wooden bridge, and it wasn't there anymore. And little 3.5-year-old Henry said, I spy something with my little eye that is not there. And I think this is exactly like this Easter scene, that somehow there's a presence in absence, right? The women are at this empty tomb. If you can't, Jesus isn't there, but yet Jesus is there. I spy with my little eye, I sense with my being something that isn't here. The tomb is empty. And after a while, after some fear, after trepidation, after confusion, after all of the feelings one would have seeing an empty tomb, one of these women, all of these women, someone told something to someone. And the question to us every Easter is, what do we tell? What is the Easter story that we share? What do we say to whom? What is the resurrection we bring into presence? I have told the Easter story in many ways. I have felt it in my being in different ways. It shifts over time. I have told the Easter story like this. I was shamed, ashamed, deep in. Easter often has shame in it. I was shamed, ashamed, deep in, literally hid in closets for much of my childhood. Ask my parents. I came out and was because of faith, spirit that loved me, and it was because of faith, spirit that loved me more. I came out at 32, and it was the most faith-filled time yet, though I know there are more. Did I freeze up, folks? I just got a little message. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. I'll just start that section again for you. I've told the Easter story like this. One of the ways. I was shamed, ashamed, deep in, literally hidden closets for much of my childhood, literal ones. Ask my parents. I came out, and it was because of faith, spirit that loved me more than me having to keep people safe. I came out at 32, and that was an Easter. To me, it was the most faith-filled time. I know there are more to come. And it was an Easter for days and days and years and nights and days. I tell the story that way, the Easter story that way sometimes. That's some of what I tell some people some of the time about Christ rising, even if I don't use that word, even if I don't say, let me tell you a story about Christ's resurrection and then tell them about coming out. That's a little awkward, but I feel it. That is the resurrection. I have told the story of Easter like this, and it's a strong one for some of you. I had babies in me and none of them survived, but I did. That's an Easter story too. I have heard the Easter story like this. I didn't know that my ancestors in faith, at least, and maybe in blood, came here to this continent and made it their second chance. And when they did, that they took what was the native inhabitants of this land, what belonged to the people of the past, Pecumtuck, Nonotuck, Wampanoag. I didn't really know that. But then when I learned it, when I let it in, I learned a little more. Barely anything, but I learned more and more and more. And then I learned how the native people honored the land. I learned the song, you got to humble yourself to Creator. You got to bend down low. You got to bend down low. You got to humble yourself to Creator. We can raise each other up higher and higher. That is an Easter story too. The learning of a new way, the bending down, the humbling ourselves. How do we tell the Easter story? There are so many ways to tell the Easter story. How do you tell it this year? How do you hear the Easter story this year? Maya Angelou tells it like this, but don't let her eloquence prevent you from telling the Easter story in your own way. Maya Angelou tells an Easter story like this: you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like the dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Do you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And to whom? So in the hymn we sang, and I froze again. I now know when it says my internet connection's unstable, it means I've frozen. In the hymn we sang, which is a common Easter hymn, it contains this line that is so Easter, that death has lost its sting. So I challenge us, for any of us, does death not sting? Death still stings. Death still stings. It still hurts, right? Our own or our beloveds. Death has a sadness, a bite, a grief to it, even if we accept it at some point, right? It hasn't lost its fullness of emotion. Easter isn't magic like that. It doesn't remove from our human beingness what it is to be human. Death doesn't disappear. It just doesn't become the end, the last word, right? And part of our being Easter people is that we tell the Easter story in our own words and with our own lives. We give it body and texture. And that's how we tell the story of the rising of life, even in the presence of death. Death is not a defeat. This is important. Death is not a defeat in human life. Death is part of life itself. Death is not a defeat. But here's how I hear the Easter rising this year, is that Easter asks us to be a resurrection people, an Easter people, which is a communion people, which is a people committed to life, and not just our own life, but to life for one another. So death has to lose its sting by our working for life for one another. Easter has to be a communal resurrection. Easter has to be the taking in of those stories like the ones I shared, those very personal places that you come out of shame and into life, and gathering our individual resurrections and then threading them together in a quilt like Polly would make, or something that one of our prayer shawl folks would make, and creating the communal new life. Easter has to be a communal resurrection. We don't get to preach anymore, or only if we ever did, or Christianity, I think, misused its responsibility to preach only that Easter is about you having your individual sins wiped away and you're good to go. No, no, no. Easter is a communal resurrection. It has to be. That's how death will lose its sting. When we, committed, inspired, resurrected by this powerful absence of Jesus, tell it different, tell our story, and commit to the life that is. It is because life is magical and blessed from the very beginning, and we are in it, that God sends Jesus infused with all of this presence and demands that we live like that. We live like that. There's a practice in, I preach from some ignorance here, so that's a flag, but I am compelled and I will learn more about it. But there's a practice in Hebrew scriptures and in Jewish tradition and faith called Jubilee. There's a practice called Jubilee. And I am so drawn to this, this year especially, and more, and it is, to me, as I hear it, it is the communal Easter. It is a resurrection practice. It comes from the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, and it describes this practice which occurred about every 50 years. Again, I'm preaching from some ignorance. There's lots of scholarship about it. There's nuances, more to learn, more for us to learn and to explore. But let me just read the clip of it from Leviticus. It says, "And you shall hallow the 50th year, and you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. Your property, and every one of you to your family." I froze again. Just a moment. "That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow or reap the aftergrowth, or harvest the for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat only what the field itself produces." And so that's the clip from Leviticus. But in practice, it meant that ancient Israelites were supposed to leave the land and not tend to remit, forgive all. Yeah. Did you hear me say they were to liberate the slaves? They were to, so the practice of Jubilee is to let the land be fallow, to remit debts, to forgive debts, to liberate slaves, and to return the property to its original owner. That is a resurrection practice. That is a commitment to a quality of life. That is saying we won't let death have the sting, because we are committed to constantly reassessing, reevaluating, redistributing, reorganizing, recognizing that time and time we pick up bad habits and we need to start again. There's so much more about Jubilee that is compelling to me this year. Death is not a defeat, except when it comes because we have not collectively done what we really could have done to hold ourselves, our communities, our beloveds to account and to life. Let us be people of this Easter re-rising this year. Let the hope of new life that has been born out of this empty tomb become like hope rising out of a womb once full and full term. New life. Easter is Jesus, yes, and Spirit and God resurrecting in us, not just individually, but in this collective being. And we become people committed to life all the more because of it. Folks, happy Easter, deep Easter, blessed Easter. May we be people who are resurrecting, who are courageous, who are for one another, in the Spirit of Christ who rises. Amen.